Ambassador Ford, Diplomatic Mission to Kepler-1649c, by Joseph N. Wdowski. Greater steel is forged. That late afternoon, Ford was invited by Minister Gorlock to give a presentation to the Assembly of Guilds. Gorlock had explained to him that it was extremely important that he win over the second foundation or second step, if he hoped to open any trade relations between their worlds. Ford and Scott waited outside a side building of the palace grounds where his diplomatic apartments were located. As he waited, Ambassador Bellerma and her diplomatic staff of 4 approached them. It was his first time meeting the Eastern Federation ambassador. Ford was surprised how strikingly beautiful the young Mongolian ambassador was. She was clearly only a couple of years younger than him. Mongolia was presently the political center of the Eastern Federation. Her entourage consisted of 2 burly Russian men with military crew cuts and tightly trimmed beards. Ford gathered they were her security. The third man in her party was a very lean Chinese man old enough to be her father. He seemed to be always close to her ear. Ford guessed he was her career state minister bureaucrat. The final member of her group was a quiet North Korean in her late 20s. She wore tortoise-shell eyeglasses and was gripping a tablet computer. After the collapse of the Chinese Communist Party, the Asian political map changed greatly. Tibet became an independent nation. Fujian, Guangdong, and Hong Kong joined with Taiwan, forming the Great Republic of China. Xinjiang, the home of the Uyghur, joined with its brethren Muslims in Kyrgyzstan. China's northeastern provinces broke off, forming the new nation of New Manchuria. The Chinese province of Inner Mongolia reunified with Mongolia. The other northern Chinese provinces along the Yellow River, along with Beijing, formed the Northern Han People's Republic. The southern Chinese provinces along the Yangtze River had united to form the Southern Han Democratic Republic. With China splintered and the weakening of Russia after their defeat in the NATO-backed Ukrainian war, most of northern and eastern Asia created a federation to counter the strength of the richer and more powerful North American and European alliance. The 2 major powers of the Eastern Federation were Russia and the new Chinese nations. Mongolia's city of Ulaanbaatar, positioned between the Russians and Chinese, became the central capital of their federation. The Greater Republic of China, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines did not join the Eastern Federation, and instead joined the North Americans and Europeans as members of the Western Alliance. Tensions were great on Earth as both international alliances attempted to sway unaligned nations to their respective sides, and they competed with each other in colonizing new worlds. As Ambassador Bellerma and her diplomatic team approached, he noted the sourness in their faces when they saw him and Scott waiting ahead of them. Ford realized that Kepler-1649c was now going to be an additional region of tensions between them. Bellerma, turning on a smile, put out her hand to Ford and in broken English greeted him Ambassador Ford. Yes. He took her hand. Nice to finally meet you, Ambassador Bellerma. Taking her hand back, she clenched it in front of her with her other hand. I want formal thank you for borrowing us Mr. Scott. He very helpful. I am happy to hear that Mr. Scott had been able to help you. 2 vehicles then pulled up beside them. Minister Gorlock exited the lead vehicle. Gesturing to the second vehicle, he informed Ambassador Bellerma there was room for 2 of her party to join her. Speaking in Russian, she turned to the 2 security guards. Not seeming pleased, they grunted in response and left. Speaking in Chinese, the other 2 climbed into the ground vehicle. She turned to Minister Gorlock. You join us? I will be in the vehicle with Ambassador Ford. We will all get back together once we arrive at the Assembly of Guilds. Ambassador Bellerma smiled, and as soon as she turned her head away from them, her smile turned off. She entered the back of the vehicle with her 2 remaining assistants. Her command of Russian, Chinese, English, and her mother tongue of Mongolian made it apparent to Ford that she was not just a beautiful face. He noted to himself not to take her lightly by underestimating her. Within the lead vehicle, Gorlock explained to Ford the importance of his presentation to the guilds. Many of the guilds fear your world's advanced technologies. How so? Ford questioned. Our advances would benefit the Gulgars greatly. I agree, the minister responded, yet they fear those advances may weaken their influences and perhaps even worse, make them. What is the word? Obsolete. That is the correct word. Obsolete. Gorlock was still not completely sure of his English. Ford nodded in the affirmative. You need to understand our guilds are hundreds of years old. Our world is not as advanced as yours, but from what I understand of your history, we were much more advanced than you were centuries ago. He looked outside the window to the modern city around them. We have lived at this level of technology for centuries. Radio technology was the last of advancements, and that was over 100 years ago. You're saying your civilization is stagnating. Ford, from his readings and studies of their culture, had already known this to be true. He was never bold enough to point it out to his hosts. Why is that? Questioned Scott. The guilds, Ford answered the career bureaucrat. Yes, Gorlock concurred. The guilds. How could they prevent the advancement of technology? Scott questioned. Bureaucracy, Mr. Scott. Governments are not the only large organizations that wallow in massive waste that only exist in order to keep existing. Scott seemed still confused. Ford tried to clarify for him. When institutions get too big and powerful, maintaining the status quo becomes their only objective. With change there is risk. With competition there is a threat to the establishment. The guilds have become too comfortable. They are set. They see nothing but risk in change. Gorlock nodded in agreement and added, the guilds are the second largest step that the throne sits upon. Without their backing, the throne will not open trade relations with your world. Ford's expression in response sparked Gorlock's curiosity. Please tell me what you are thinking, Ambassador Ford. Taking a breath, Ford felt he could be straight with the minister. I do not think the guilds are the only reason for your stagnation. Gorlock pressed Ford to elaborate. How so? Please, I am very interested in your observations. Knowing that most likely his conversations were all being recorded by his hosts, even in the privacy of his diplomatic apartments, Ford leaned towards Gorlock and lowered his voice as if not wanting to be overheard. For how long have you had a single world government? At least 1,000 years, the alien minister responded. Why? At my only audience with the Emperor, it was very clear that my world not being of one government disturbed the imperial court greatly, he explained. Well, yes, of course, your world seems less stable to us. Your world, by having conflicting governments, continue to struggle against each other. Even though you are clearly more advanced technologically than we are, you still war with each other. We have had peace for the past 1,000 years. I do not understand what your point is. That is my point. On Earth we do struggle, compete, and even war with each other. That fact forces us to advance. If one nation would settle for the status quo, it would soon be devoured or dominated by a more advanced nation. Our conflicts and struggles, as you point out, does make for a less peaceful world, but it does stimulate change and advancements. From the heat of the furnace and the heavy strikes of the hammer upon the anvil, greater steel is forged. Minister Gorlock's eyes widened with understanding. Greater steel is forged.